Hey, it's KRD&D Homebrew, struggling today with a cold, so my voice is going to get scratchy during this. But what I wanted to talk about was the allure of the Fey. Fey creatures, the idea of a Fey world or Fey area in your wilderness. You're building your own homebrewed world. Areas where it kind of bleeds in. And I'm doing this in my own homebrewed world. I got this Fey area that I'm kind of working on, as always with these videos. It's usually something I'm actually working on. And it got me thinking about how it's so cool. The Fey creatures, first of all, they're sort of like in between. They're in this kind of twilight plane between the material and the Fey lands and stuff. And they're in that in between in terms of the morality of these creatures. It's not just that they're traditionally tricksters or that they're out to, mess with people at some either, pleasant way or malicious way. It's that they're almost aberrant or alien in the way that they conceive of morality. They're magically infused. You think of like the dryads in the old game where they could, charm someone and have them come into the pond or whatever. I'm sure the legends came from hunters that wandered into some area and disappeared. They said a dryad got him, right? And they were beautiful. They weren't like, they didn't savagely kill you or, they weren't terrifying. But they lived in another realm where they didn't understand anything about what it was like to be a person in the world. They were magical, right? They were folkloric. They were part of nature and part of the sentient world of things that could communicate with you. And this is sort of the archetype of Fey creatures. So like in Pathfinder, let's say something like a red cap, which is a totally evil, destructive Fey creature. They just go around and this big scythe and they live off the blood of their victims and they have this foot stomp. They're just evil. They just revel in killing. And they're Fey, right? They're from this Fey world. As opposed to like sprites or fairies or, nixies can be a little more, but notice we're getting into this. And in the old days, we had brownies and stuff. Those are much more touched by goodness and by, you don't think of them. You're not worried about them ripping you to shreds. But they don't exist with the same sense of morality. They're Fey. They're uninterested. I wonder if Tom Bombadil, the old Lord of the Rings guy, was somehow related to the Fey. Right, that Fey land, and was it Goodberry, his wife? And nothing like that is said in the books, and I'm not saying there's any connection. But I've got Fey on the brain right now because I'm creating this area. Because they kind of form this bridge, as I said, between the concepts of good and evil, between reality and a dream world, and between the natural and the supernatural. They kind of embody this union of these things. And so when nature becomes in a Fey land, also becomes kind of bridging this as well. So you can have trees that hum some song, or famously, the trees that tried to put the hobbits to sleep when they went to see Tom Bombadil. You can have structures that are actually built of moonlight or something that only appear certain times of the year in a Fey area, right? Because it has this sort of merging between different planes. And, their interaction with humanoids contains this sort of contrast, this sort of conflict or whatever, pride and hubris, and, there are consequences for things. Some villager that goes out into some Fey land and wants to dance with the Fey creatures and disappears for 100 years, sort of the Rip Van Winkle thing, right? When he goes off, I think it's the dwarves are playing the thunder, the bowling or something. I'd have to look at that legend. But he goes to sleep for 100 years. That's a very Fey land sort of thing to happen to someone. The person that wishes for infinite beauty, sort of a narcissist thing. And when they get it, all they can do is stare at the reflection, and they just stay in the Fey woods and marvel at how wonderful they are, right? Or a king who does some gets a favor from these Fey creatures and promises something and then tries to usurp this. And they have their revenge in a very Fey-like way. The firstborn of various families disappears, is taken into the Fey land. And to them, there'd be nothing cruel about it because they live in a place kind of beyond conventional morality. Because I think cruelty, if you have a Fey queen or something, and she sees that these people are not respecting her forest, her retribution is going to be deadly. You know, and there are other classic fey creatures, the satyr, right? Who, you know, is from Greek mythology, and all they want to do is drink wine and dance and, you know, have sex or whatever. They're this classic symbol of Dionysian frenzy and a thing where they're not interested in anything to do with the normal attributes of human life in terms of order, in terms of responsibility, in terms of honoring boundary lines or whatever. None of that appeals to a Sartre. We talked about pixies and sprites and the trickery and the constant, you know, the poltergeist thing where a pixie or comes along and moves your stuff around or takes something, a little prize, and they see nothing wrong. They have no sense of that. They just saw some bright, shiny object, but it was the gemstone of the ancients. Well, that's pretty, but they're not going to use it for anything except just their own amusement, right? This is the other thing. There's this disconnect between the so-called world of consequence and the world of the Fae. You know, you also have one of my favorite ones, the Quickly. If you look at the stats both in 5e and Pathfinder, unbelievably fast. They literally go, I think it's 120 a turn. They zip, zip, zip. They always have extra actions and stuff. I mean, you know, there's something unnatural about you. You can't quite figure out what they want exactly. They haunt you. They usually have some area, some body of water or some glade that's theirs. And they're nasty to fight, believe me. And in classic folklore, you have the gremlin, right? Which is what we associate with when some piece of machinery or, you know, starts to go bad. We say it has gremlins. We can't figure out what's going on. Things are just breaking for unknown reasons. Gremlins are annoying tricksters. They're mischievous. They're a little more, you know, on the obnoxious side of mischievous. And I think that malicious side of Fae is something that you know, because sometimes you'll see people try to run Fae a little less. I mean, obviously things like red caps or even quicklings or something, people run those as bad. But you know, I'll run a pixie or I'll run a sprite or something, and they're almost what you would call malicious in the way they think about playing tricks on humanoids. And certainly, you know, a will-o-wisp is a Fey creature. They're malicious, all right. They're trying to lure you into the bog to drown you. But the point is that they are beyond conventional morality, and there's something there that, you know, when you're fay-touched, for example, they'll have this in a Pathfinder setting where you can be fay-touched as a ancestry. What does that mean exactly? And most people just look at it for the stats or whatever. But to me, if you're fay-touched, you are touched by this other world. You are touched. There's something strange about you. There's something that's not quite right, you know. And I think people would see that in you. And you would always have people, I think, if you were fay-touched, if you have those ancestries in your game, you know, you don't necessarily want to burn people, player characters, and say, well, everyone distrusts you, everyone hates you. But on the other hand, you can say, if you play this character, you know, it's like the old tiefling in 5e, right? You know, look like a devil. There's a lot of people who are going to not like you or be suspicious of you or afraid of you or whatever. The Fae has a whole different thing because I think that, you know, a diabolic thing like the tiefling's devil thing, we know what the devil's all about. Bad, trying to get power, you know, setting up bargains, whatever. The Fae, they sort of don't care. They're sort of the ultimate wild card in a way. So if you were Fay-touched, you are from this place that is beyond good and evil, as Nietzsche used to say. And he was talking about the genealogy of morals. He was talking about how morals come out of practical considerations and not from some heavenly source. But in this kind of environment, this is a world, the Fey world, that doesn't appear to those rules. And that's a threatening thing. And another aspect that's infused to me in the Fey world is the sense of trickery and the joy of puzzles and of, you know, cryptic riddles and fables and, you know, putting pieces together of something and enjoying in watching someone struggle with that or you know, playing games with people. I think there's something really important about that because they will use those riddles or those puzzles or those cryptic things to potentially have the players give the players something, but also get something back in return. They delight in the idea of engaging with you in a game, which stakes might be super high, your own freedom, you are now under their service for 100 years, something like that. That trickster stuff is something that really encourages role play because you could outsmart a Fey creature potentially. Because you look at the stats, and if they're not super intelligent, the players get a chance to trick the trickster, as it were. And in my, view of what the Fey are about, I think they would like that. I think they'd be like, "Oh, that was impressive." So I think you can play up the trickster element, not just so much in annoying little poltergeist things, but in the way they think about how things should interact. So anyway, I'm going to be making some more Fey type. I'm building this whole area for my my Homebrewed campaign, so I'll be coming out with those. I'm going to be putting some more stuff, too, on the Patreon channel. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters. This week, I did the Sewer of the Were-Rats, which was really fun. Those of you out there, I'd love to hear what you think about running the Fey. Give a like, give a comment. Most importantly, of course, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.